Have you ever looked at the world and wondered, how did some countries get so rich while others are still struggling? Well, a huge piece of that puzzle comes down to two really powerful economic blueprints that came out of the West: modernization theory and neoliberal globalization. And trust me, these aren't just dusty old academic terms. They're powerful ideas that have completely shaped the world we live in, for better and maybe for worse. And that brings us right to the heart of what we're talking about today. The big question is this: were these grand theories genuine tools for progress, or were they a new, maybe more subtle form of domination? That's what we're going to dig into. Okay, so here's our game plan. We're going to start with the post-war origins of modernization theory, check out its most famous model, and then trace the rise of neoliberalism and how it shaped globalization. We even see how this all played out in Africa, and then, we'll circle right back to that huge central question. All right, first up, let's jump in our time machine. To really get a handle on this first blueprint, you have to picture the world it was born into. We're talking about a planet just reeling from a massive war, with new nations popping up all over the place trying to find their footing. So picture it, it's 1945, the Second World War is over, old colonial empires are starting to crumble, new countries are showing up on the map, and the Cold War is just heating up. It's in this really chaotic moment that modernization theory pops up in the United States. It was basically the West's first big how-to guide for developing these brand new independent nations. And this quote from Gabriel Almond just perfectly captures the mindset at the time. There was this incredible optimism, right? This belief that the path to success that Europe and North America took, well, now everyone could follow it. It wasn't just seen as an economic plan, it was like they were spreading progress itself to these nations that were, as he says, newly freed from colonialism. But, and this is a huge but, there was something else going on under the surface. A really powerful political engine was driving all of this. I mean, this wasn't just about being helpful. At its core, it was a key part of the United States' Cold War strategy. The goal was to create stable, anti-communist allies all around the world. So the economics and the politics, they were completely tangled up together. Okay, so how was this modernization actually supposed to work? Well, the theory's most famous answer came in the form of what was basically a simple recipe: Rostow's 5 stages of growth. So this American economist, W. Rostow, he laid out this super clear 5-step path, and he argued that every single society had to follow this exact sequence. You start as a traditional society, then you build the preconditions for takeoff, then you have the big industrial takeoff itself, you drive to maturity, and finally, and this was the grand prize, you arrive at the age of high mass consumption. And guess what he based that final stage on? The post-war United States, of course. And you've got to understand, this was not just some neutral economic model. Not at all. Rostow actually subtitled his book, A Non-Communist Manifesto. He was basically throwing down the gauntlet, creating a direct capitalist counter-argument to Marxist ideas about how history and development are supposed to work. But here's the thing. By the 1970s, it was becoming pretty obvious that this simple 5-step plan, while it wasn't really working for everybody, the problems in the global south were way more complicated than the theory allowed for. So, the stage was set for a new, and I mean much more aggressive blueprint to take over: neoliberalism. So what on earth is neoliberalism? Well, if you boil it all down, it's the idea that the absolute best thing for humanity is to let business and entrepreneurial freedom run wild. It's all about private property, totally free markets, and free trade. And the government's main job? It's not to provide services or anything like that. It's to create and protect the market, period. And its origin story is really interesting. This wasn't just an idea that someone cooked up in a university classroom. It was a full-on political project. See, in the 1970s, you had all this economic crisis and social unrest, and the ruling classes felt like their power was being threatened. Neoliberalism became their playbook to get that power back. And this incredibly powerful new ideology, well, it would soon become the engine for the next great reshaping of the world, the era of neoliberal globalization. Okay, this next point is really, really important to get. Globalization by itself is just the process of the world getting more connected, right? More international influence, more interdependence. Neoliberalism, on the other hand, is the specific ideology, the rule book, the set of beliefs that has driven this most recent phase of globalization. the one that emphasizes free markets and letting corporations operate anywhere and everywhere. So what was the result? What happened when this new rulebook was applied to the entire world? Well, the result can be summed up in one pretty shocking number: 78 to 1. What does that even mean, 78 to 1? It means that by 1994, the richest 20% of the world's population was earning 78 times more than the poorest 20%. The gap between the global rich and the global poor just exploded during this era of neoliberal globalization. Now, to see how these big abstract theories actually played out on the ground, let's zoom in on Africa. Because the continent tells two very, very different stories about what globalization really meant. From one point of view, the outcome has been absolutely devastating. The scholar Manuel Castells calls Africa's exclusion from the new global informational capitalism a form of dehumanization. The argument is that globalization basically overwhelmed and sidelined much of the continent. But that is absolutely not the only story. You have scholars like Muganda Wire and Saludo writing from within Africa, who argue that African nations have the agency and the resources to act for themselves. Their view is that Africa can and should learn to compete on the global stage. They really emphasize the continent's own power and internal dynamics, rather than just seeing it as a passive victim of global forces. Okay, so after all that, where does this leave us? Let's go back to that big question we started with: progress or domination? It's time to evaluate these two blueprints. And here we are, right back where we started. We've seen the optimistic promises, and we've seen some of the pretty stark realities. So what's the verdict? Were these theories genuine attempts to help the world move forward, or were they really just sophisticated tools for serving the interests of the West? You know, if there's one single thing to take away from all this, it might be this fundamental shift in focus. Modernization theory was all about building the nation. The state was supposed to be the main character, guiding development from the top. But then neoliberalism came along and just completely flipped the script. All of a sudden, it was all about private companies competing in a global market, and the state was basically demoted to the role of a facilitator, just there to help business along. In the end, both of these incredibly influential blueprints came from the global north. Both of them promised a clear road to prosperity for the global south. And both of them, in their own unique ways, completely reshaped the world that all of us live in today. The big question of whether they ultimately brought more progress or more domination, well, that's a debate that is far, far from over.